Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7. So yes, this is another in the series of looks at the Last Jedi Novelization by Jason Fry, and the things that we can learn from it that will enhance our viewing pleasure of The Last Jedi. Today we're wrapping up part 2 of the novelization, and just a few interesting little tidbits, facts, figures, answers to some very unusual questions that you might have had, like, for example, why that particular spot in the middle of nowhere, you might ask? Why was it that the Resistance decided that was the place to come out of hyperspace? Well, according to the Last Jedi Novelization, it is an old Alliance rendezvous point, and it was a randomly selected set of coordinates. So there was some rationale to it. However, it's also rather interesting that it's not entirely random because it is within 12 to 18 to 24 hours away from the planet Crate at sublight speed. And Pablo Hidalgo from the story group likes to quote J. Michael Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, in talking about hyperspace or faster than light travel as happening at the speed of plot, as he puts it. The idea that if you need your cast and crew to go someplace very quickly, then you invent this thing called hyperspace and you let them go bing, like, and go really fast so you can get on to the next part of the story. So the idea of setting a random meeting point in the middle of deep space, and it also happening to be within a day's journey of Crate at sublight, like, you imagine that that would have to alert anybody who figured out that, oh, if this is where they're going, and then it's got to be nearby Crate or something like that. But I think at that point, we are just looking too deeply into things, and we probably just need to let it go and let the story take us where it will. So I'm going to say, hey, let's not worry about that too much. One thing that was rather surprising in the novelization, as far as a reveal goes, has to do with Leia's use of the Force. So, of course, you'll recall that now I think we can probably call it iconic scene where Leia, lost in space after the destruction of the Raddus's bridge, manages to use the Force to get back onto the ship and be rescued by the Resistance. Well, there was a question, I guess, of how she did it, or has been a question of how she did it, considering that, for all we know, she has never really demonstrated Force powers as we know them. And the novelization takes it a little bit out of her hands. Instead of it being something that she actively did, it seems to be something that maybe she sort of unconsciously or subconsciously did, and maybe the Force helped her out as part of the process. Jason Fry describes her reaching out to the Force because she actually realized that the cloaked beacon that she had that would allow Rey to find her way back to the Resistance, that it had come off of her, and she had to get it back because if Rey showed up and it was just the First Order and everybody else was dead, then Rey was going to be dead too. So ultimately, that's what kind of propelled her back into saying, I got to get back in the fight. And in reaching out through the Force, she was able to sense all these little microorganisms and all this life that still managed to exist and was barely hanging on to existence in the vacuum of space. She could see it like a ladder forming, and a possibility in her mind that she could climb that ladder, that she could ascend it, and she asked the Force for help in ascending that ladder actually leading back to the ship. That's sort of literal, sort of metaphorical. I think probably more metaphorical than not. And suddenly she's able to progress through space and arrive back on the Raddus. So kind of her, kind of not her, and kind of the Force, and ultimately kind of mystical in another situation where perhaps we just need to let it be and not overanalyze it all that much. All right, a couple more tidbits and then we'll call it a day. So the first casualty of the battle in deep space was the Vigil. That was one of the 4 Resistance fleet ships, and it was destroyed by the TIE fighters in the initial attack before the Resistance ships were able to go to full power and get out of the range where the First Order capital ships could cover the TIE fighters. But The Vigil, unfortunately, didn't last that long. It was a cargo frigate, and it had a bit of a story hinted at in the Incredible Cross-Sections book by Jason Fry, oddly enough. It was a cargo frigate that was captured by the Resistance in a battle with pirates off the Chazodron Shoals. That's as much as we know about the ship's limited history, so there's a hint of some intrigue and action around it, but sadly the Vigil is no more. And for all you Snap Wexley fans who are going, wait a second, where was he in The Last Jedi? Well, he and Jessica Pava, who incidentally, they have a thing going on according to the Poe Dameron comic series, those two and other pilots were sent to gather the surviving Resistance commanders. So that's why they were not in The Last Jedi. They were trying to round up more support, and considering what was about to happen with the Resistance, they kind of all needed to regroup and plan for what the future was going to look like under this new crazy First Order situation. So that's why the two of them were gone. But J.J. Abrams is directing Episode 9 and co-writing it after all, so I would bet dollars to donuts that Snap Wexley is going to find his way back into Episode 9. Mark my words. And that is going to do it for the meat of the podcast here. If you check out the audio version of the podcast at sw7x7.com/iTunes or wherever you like to listen to podcasts, then you'll get to hear a little extra bit about Poe and Finn. But for this bit, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.